I've criticised much on this show, which has caused many issues. And some don't like it, and I get that. Yet those same people who don't like it fail to address or entertain the plethora of attacks or critique of our own group. Now, do I like criticising? Not particularly. Not at all, actually. Because I actually wish it was all different. But sometimes the criticism is what we need to hear, not what we want to hear. And here are some of the reasons of why, from the people's perspective, of things that we've covered in the show at various times. I've criticised all colours of the world. Why? Well, look around you. Not one colour is looking after their own people. Never mind others. We can't carry on ignoring it and hope it goes away, because it won't. And then we have the playing into the culture and traditions game. For example, we are Americans and this is our way. You're forgetting Americans largely came from other countries who have their own cultures. And also forgetting or not knowing it was the system that we're fighting against that created all of the cultures and traditions. There is no cultures. It was all created. And culture is another divide and conquer program in its raw form. So if cultures were beneficial, then why are we all fighting? And then we come to the big one that I've criticised, religion, all of them. But unlike others who just make statements, I've provided substantial evidence to support and back that claim. And it gives people an opportunity to see both sides. And it's your choice which side you choose to believe. But again, you've got to ask the question, if religions are beneficial, why are we all fighting over it? Why is my God better than yours? And why, if religion is all about morals and wholly based, with over 65% of the planet following it, is there so much anger, strife, violence and discord surrounding it? Something doesn't add up. When we look around the world, and even more so now with this fake virus, there's not a single place on the planet in any sort of harmony, be it countries or the people within it. So clearly, from that perspective alone, that program does not do what it says on the tin. And if we continue to play to that tune, it will render the exact same results of chaos and discord. I've criticised all governments, and recently Mr. Trump also, which has upset some people. But then again, I will ask all people of the world to state where and when their government actually did something that benefits their people. Now, people may throw up a few isolated examples, but largely what they push forward as good for the people is always in some ways weaponized against us in secret. And I could spend the rest of the show highlighting examples of that. But let's just use one. Climate change. Yeah, the governments, some paid child prodigy and the UN are fighting to save the planet. Or so they say. Forgetting it was them and their paymasters that destroyed it to begin with their outdated technology called oil, or coal, or nuclear. What a novel idea that was, nuclear power. The truth is the UN is out of funds. So are the private Rothschild's army known as NATO, which is a heads up to the Egyptian Aton. And no, it's not a coincidence. And they are planning to loot every country who signs up for the climate change agreement of its wealth to allegedly pay for climate change. Does anybody ask why aren't the oil, coal and nuclear companies paying to clean up the planet? Of course not. And what they're asking for is 2% GDP of each country to pay for NATO and hand over all in-ground assets to the UN to allegedly pay for climate change. It's not. It's to keep the same failed power brokers in funds and in charge. I've criticised many countries, and people get so defensive of their country due to what is essentially thinly disguised fascism, running under the term patriotism. It's the same thing. Love of the country over and above love of the people. But countries in their world don't exist. They're not interested in countries. There's all are pawns in a giant game that too few outside of THI know exists, including governments. And some have said recently that it all sounds a bit arrogant, but not if it's true, it isn't. But that is a further example of people's state of mind. You know, for years I was told I had to stop playing down my role in things. And then you point out a few things that we've achieved, and then people accuse you of being arrogant and self-serving. Which is it to be? You can't win. And the same applies to the proof that many in the alt media are pushing only onto one show and one host only. Where is your proof, they cry. Are you blind? You know, would be my response. And I don't have to tell anyone listening to this show the proof that we've supplied in bucket loads. And yet isn't it curious these same people never ask anyone else for proof? Why aren't they asking Kumo of what he's up to when his policy is killing thousands of elderly New York people? It's banal thinking, and it shows inner turmoil being projected onto others. Well, if you're going to project, at least project on something and someone who's doing evil things. And then we come to the alt media criticism and me outing certain individuals. And many of which were previously not believed when I first outed it or them. And yet one by one, all came to be seen. That's what bothers me most, is calling out people in the alt media. It's not what I wanted to do. But I knew the alt media was infected as early as the 2000s. What I didn't realise was the depth of it. And my first venture on a blog site barely lasted a few months, as I started informing the members there was Israeli agitators and agents throughout the page on a website called Disclosed TV. And what I did was I taught members how to spot them, and they found out for themselves. And the members started calling them out. And suddenly the owners of Disclosed TV, hello Langley, said we are going to upgrade the site and the blog to Disclosed TV 2. And not to worry, all will be invited back. Except yours truly. Which I did forecast to the other blog colleagues at the time. But the problem is most people don't think when they go on a page that it's being run or heavily infiltrated by agents or agencies, and so don't spot it. And I know there is, and I check it out first and see if they wish to play. Then we engage or we don't. Now, it was way more difficult back then, despite there being lesser numbers involved in the alt media back then, as the masks were fairly fixed and they could hide. But over the last few years, those masks have dropped and the frequencies can give them away. And they're far more easier to spot and navigate now. But what changed everything in relation to the alt media, unbeknown to many at the time, but actually put agents on alert, was the faction show we did in late 2015. Why? Because it defined a clearer path than just calling them the Cabal or the Illuminati, which had ended at least a decade prior in that format. And I began to warn of faction-based alt media groups and entities as they became easier to spot as their disclosures, and you do get disclosures out of these people, sometimes fairly heavy disclosures, but they always left out their own particular faction. But you take disclosure as it comes. But you always have to be aware that they're steering that information against the other factions. The Rothschilds clan and the Black Sun members were in all factions, so they always win, or so they thought. But over the past 5 years, most of the regular alt media have been found to be faction-based. And like I said, it's fairly easy to spot, and I can write groundbreaking stuff all day, every day, and yet not one site will pick it up. When you think of some of the epic shows and disclosures that we've had, and it's never publicised. And yet David Wilcock writes, "Please buy my book." And I had a synchronicity today for the 33rd time. Oh, look, there's another synchronicity as we speak. And within hours, it spread right throughout the alt media by many sites. It's not about popularity, folks. This is steering the narrative and promoting their paid agents and clans. That's how it works. And a further example of that, and more in your face, is Jordan Sather. It's funny, no one questions him either. Whereby he goes from a complete unknown, talking mainstream media op-ed pieces on a board, to over 100,000 listeners within a day. Does that make any sense? When you've got people like Randy Morgans, who's been in the alt media for near 20 years, but would have to do around 30 to 40 shows to generate the same numbers. Again, does that make any sense? Alan James also, he's been doing it longer than I have. And yet we have Anna Von Reitz, Robert David Steele, Wilcock, Sather and Keenan, when he was around, write one piece and all of a sudden it's all over the internet. Why? Because they all work for a faction, is why. And it tells you how deep the problem really is. George Webb, some people like listening to him, but he admitted he is Mossad in his own report. I outed him as a Mossad agent, and he admitted it in his own report. Shane Bales stated in 2 shows he's a Rothschild. I got criticised for that. I got criticised for outing Simon Parkes. And why I outed him, which he admitted himself, astral rape of his own members. And then conveniently blamed Anu, his father. Anna von Reitz admitted she was a Habsburg and subsequently a Rothschild. And yet I and THI got criticism for pointing all that out. You know, like I said, I'd rather not. And then, we had the Wilcock and Corey Good at the height of their alt media popularity back in 2014, and I outed them. And I got terrible abuse for that, even some of our own members. And received little to no support inside the alt media for doing so. And yet, curiously, 3 years later, Randy Morgans does a piece on it, and the whole alt media then turn on Wilcock and Good. Why? Because they were being pushed out of it. And their books or videos were no longer being bought. Self-serving, you see. I did it because they were presenting a fake story to the public, which has since been proven correct. I outed Robert David Steele 4 years ago and got accused of knocking out all the competition. And I'm suggesting people should only listen to our show. And yet how many people are just now seeing through the illusion Mr. Steele and his Orsini family-backed partner, he of the fake stage name, Sacha Stone. I outed a number of the ET disclosure groups. And parts 1 and 2 of the event show, which I'll touch on later, reveals exactly why. Because the Majestic and the CIA infiltrated all ET and UFO groups to change the narrative and produce bullshit. They told you that in part 1 of that series. Not 1 or 2 of them, but all of them. And the answer is, I didn't like outing any one of them. I wished and wanted to be part of a much larger alt media team. But they had infiltrated it to such extremes I could no longer be quiet. Because they're sending people down cul-de-sacs. You're not going to learn down cul-de-sacs. And one always hopes the people who doubted me on those stances will now see the error of their ways. We all get things wrong. It's no big deal. And it's also okay to question me or THI, as long as it's for learning purposes. But many of the questions are not questions at all, they're actually statements with a negative vibe. But over time, people have seen virtually everyone that THI had to expose, eventually exposed themselves and vindicated THI. And like I said, this is not about being right, but doing the right thing when called upon to do so. That is the difference. And trust me, there are hundreds of things I've said on this show over the past 4 years where I genuinely wish I was wrong. Sadly, that turned out not to be the case in far too many examples.